Greetings and welcome back to Son of the Cinema. I love comedies. And there's so many different styles of comedies and different ways of humor. And people's senses of humor are so different. But I think most people can agree on the film that I'm going to be reviewing if they've seen it. It's one of the greatest comedies ever made. I think it's even on the top 3 of all time, or whatever the list is. I'm referring to Stanley Kubrick's masterpiece, black comedy, Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. That's the full title. This is an absolute work of genius. You know, Kubrick was a genius, and I'm going to be reviewing quite a few of his films, of course. I mean, he only made 13 in his long career, but each one of them was a masterpiece, and this is one of the greatest. You know, Kubrick was obsessed with the whole Cold War scenario, and it was a very erudite man, and he had learnt, I think he read something insane, like 50 books on the subject. And of course, I mean, Dr. Strangelove was made during the height of the Cold War. And of course, after the Cuban Missile Crisis as well, you know, there was a massive amount of paranoia around, and justifiably so. And so Kubrick, after Lolita, put his energies towards making this movie. And he really meant it as a serious film. But while he was writing the script, and he bought the rights to Peter George's book Red Alert, which dealt with this whole issue of nuclear annihilation. And while he was adapting the book and writing the book, he just discovered that, you know, the situation and the whole concept was so absurd that a lot of the lines that were coming out were humorous. And so he thought to himself, you know, the best way to get your message across, and this is always the case, is to use humor. You can say anything with comedy and get away with it. And he thought, well, the best way to tell this story is in a humorous way, make it a black comedy. And so he employed a guy called Terry Southern, who was well known for his satirical writing. And together they penned what must be one of the greatest comedic scripts. It's absolutely brilliant. Should have won an Oscar. Of course it didn't. It is a masterpiece. It is so finely crafted. So what is the story about? It's basically about a Air Force base where one of the generals on the Air Force base, who has the unfortunate name of Jack Ripper, decides to issue a code red. And a code red is basically when it's because of a sneak attack by the Russians. And then what comes into effect is Plan R. And Plan R is where the B-52 bombers that have already been circling on the sort of border of Russia will then go in with their hydrogen bombs and nuke the hell out of Russia. So this is Plan R. And of course the planes can't be recalled because obviously the enemy might try and impersonate the Americans and recall the bombers. So the bombers are instructed specifically not to respond to any, so radio silence comes into play, and they cannot be recalled unless they get the recall code. So Jack Ripper, General Ripper, issues this a red alert, and of course the whole base goes into shutdown. And Lionel Mandrake, who is this British officer, he thinks this is just a drill, and he goes to visit General Ripper, and of course discovers this is not the case. But then he is locked in with General Ripper, and the base comes under attack, because obviously then the government is informed, and the president never issued the red alert. So of course he brings together all these generals in the war room, and chief among them is Buck Turgidson, brilliantly played by George C. Scott. And General Turgidson is like, oh well, it doesn't matter, look, it's not like we're not going to get our hair singed, but it'll only be 10, 20 million people tops killed. Not a huge amount of people. It's fine. Sound familiar? So General Turgidson is kind of, probably secretly wishing that, Plan R is finally, we're now in a shooting war with the Russians, finally, because he's kind of just about as gung-ho as Ripper is. And he's really kind of like a buffoonish character. I'm going to talk about his performance a little bit later. So President Merklyn Muffley is astounded and shocked by this whole thing, and he brings in the Russian premier into the war room to try and, bring to an end this crisis and explain to the Russians that they were not responsible. This is a rogue general who's gone a little crazy. And this is one of the most pivotal and hilarious scenes in the entire film, where Merklyn Muffley, the president of the United States, gets Premier Kisself on the line and tries to explain to him, if he can turn down the music because the premier is drunk, trying to explain to him that this is not, the Americans didn't do this, and let's resolve this. And the whole telephone conversation was improvised. Now, Kubrick went on record as saying Peter Sellers was the only actor that he worked with who could properly improvise. And this is no more apparent in this scene, where Sellers basically improvises an entire 5-minute phone call with the premier. And obviously the premier is not even on the end of the line. He's just improvising the entire conversation. And it is hilarious. I mean, he's sort of this meek, mild-mannered president who sort of goes, well, one of our generals went and did a silly thing. He went a little funny in the head. And it carries on with this most absurd conversation where he says, I'm sorry. Well, don't say that you're sorrier than I. I'm just as sorry as you are. And it just kind of highlights the absurdity of politics and the games that people play and the absolutely ludicrous conversations that politicians have. And it is just a moment of brilliance. I mean, for this telephone conversation alone, Peter Sellers should have won the Oscar. He was nominated in 1964 as Best Actor and really should have won. And as much as I love Rex Harrison, who won Best Actor for My Fair Lady, it doesn't compare to Peter Sellers' tour de force in this movie. I mean, Sellers plays 3 different roles in this film. He plays Merklyn Muffley, the President of the United States. He plays Lionel Mandrake, the British Air Force commander who's locked in with the mad General Ripper. And he plays the mysterious Dr. Strangelove. And he's absolutely brilliant and totally unrecognizable in all 3 roles. It's a phenomenal performance. Honestly, one of the greatest Oscar travesties that he never won. An extraordinary performance. He has some of the funniest lines. There's a great line where, of course, the Premier Kisself, the Russian premier, has been, or should I say, the Russian aide has been invited into the war room so that they can kind of let him see the big board. And Turgidson is like, you can't let him in here. And they let him in, and the next thing is a scuffle, and Buck Turgidson has got the Russian premier in a headlock, and the American president says, gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the war room. One of the most immortal lines in filmdom. So, and things come to a head, and the extraordinary thing about this film is that it's really only 3 locations. It's the war room, General Ripper's office, where he's locked in with Lionel Mandrake, and the interior of the plane going to bomb. And the plane is now is run by Major Kong, played by Slim Pickens. And interestingly enough, Peter Sellers was also supposed to play this role, and he did play it, except he fell out of the plane during shooting and broke his leg. And so they had to replace him, or that role, and they got Slim Pickens, an actual cowboy. And it's an inspired choice. He is hilarious with this southern drawl. 8 prophylactics. He's reading out the list of all the things of the survival kit, Pella could have a pretty good time in Vegas with this. And interestingly enough, he doesn't, in the film, he doesn't say Vegas. He actually says a fella could have a pretty good time in Dallas with this. and they had to change it because the premiere of the film, this is really interesting, was the 22nd of November 1963, which was the day that President Kennedy was assassinated. So they had to delay the premiere of the film, and they had to change that line, you know, from a pretty fella could have a pretty good time in Dallas to Vegas. So very interesting. And of course, a lot of Kennedy was involved in the Cuban Missile Crisis. So, you know, there was a lot of emotion involved. This is, just as I mentioned, an absolutely brilliant film. And it's not just Peter Sellers' a virtuoso performance. George C. Scott, hilarious in this role. He manages to be totally over the top and yet completely believable because he believes the character. And interestingly enough, he hated the film. Kubrick actually tricked him into his performance because he wanted to play it straight. And Kubrick told him, you know, play it straight. But then he said to him, oh, George, can I just have one take where you go over the top? And then he used that take for all the scenes in the entire movie. So, of course, George C. Scott had no idea that his performance was being manipulated. It's vintage Kubrick. But it is a hilarious performance. It is so funny. This gum chewing, you know, and having conversations with his girlfriend during the war room, you know, say your prayers, honey. You know, Bucky's going to be back soon. A really, really, really hilarious performance, full of little niggles and eye scratching and quirks and little movements. It's just a comedy masterpiece performance. And the third great performance in this film is Sterling Hayden, who plays General Jack Ripper. It is a chilling, chilling, chilling performance of every madman that's ever existed on the planet, that has started wars and engaged in warfare when peace could have actually been the solution. Every tin pot Hitler is kind of, you know, is really represented in Sterling Hayden's chilling performance. And Kubrick brilliantly shoots him from below. And it's a really inspired angle because it just creates this absolute malevolent, godlike, you know, madman. Interestingly enough, the film was actually shot in black and white, which really lends an incredible aesthetic to the film. And it allows Kubrick to play with shadows. And a lot of the set, this magnificent war room that was actually designed by Ken Adam, and it looks like straight out of James Bond. And of course, Ken Adam designed the James Bond sets. It is a brilliant set with this huge table with 26 generals around it. There's a massive, magnificent neon board. And then the lighting. They use something insane, like 26 miles of cable for lighting the war room. It's one of the great film sets ever built. And of course, the interior of the B-52 bomber, also brilliantly designed. And of course, Ripper's the interior of Ripper's office, which Kubrick used brilliantly with the shutters to create that sort of shafts of light. It's really brilliantly shot and lit by Gilbert Taylor, who was the DOP. Really, really brilliantly done. There's everything in here. Typical Kubrick. He uses handheld shots. Even the attack on the base when the Americans try to shut the base down. It's using a handheld camera, so it looks straight out of newsreel from World War II. And Kubrick actually took a handheld camera together with Gilbert Taylor, and they both shot it dressed in army uniforms. So it was like exactly what they did in World War II, with cameramen in combat gear filming the war and the fight. So it's got that newsreel feel, handheld, you know, typical Kubrick, cutting edge, way before it was ever done. Really, really brilliant. And yeah, this movie, I can't say enough about it. It is absolutely brilliant. And of course, the final character that Sellers plays, Dr. Strangelove, the ex-Nazi, thanks Klaus Schwab, the ex-Nazi who's been roped in by, you know, managed to escape Nuremberg and was employed by the Americans to build the bomb and to build, you know, and this is straight out of what actually happened, Operation Paperclip, where many German scientists were employed by the Americans and sidestepped Nuremberg. Also, a bizarre performance by Sellers. with this black glove that he strangles himself and refers to the president as Mein Führer. And of course, the extraordinary ending where he stands, he's in a wheelchair the whole movie, or when he appears, and then suddenly stands at the end of the movie and it's like, Mein Führer, I can walk. And then, of course, the bombs explode and we hear Vera Lynn's "We'll Meet Again." What an awesome, awesome, fantastic, brilliant movie.